podcast. Today I have a guest that I'm really excited about. Her name is Susie Schwartz. And when I first came across Susie, I was really excited because she was speaking to a topic that I have felt really curious about. And that topic is negative positivity. Now, I had been introduced to this topic under a different name, toxic positivity. And I really liked what Susie had to say in relation to negative positivity and reframing toxic positivity to something that is a little less harsh. She likes to share negative positivity within the context of we're all learning and we have intentions beneath our words. Maybe they're not always hitting the mark the way we would hope, but it doesn't mean that we're out there, spreading toxicity. We might be adding hurt to someone who's already in pain, and that's why these conversations are good to have. But toxic positivity is maybe a little bit off the mark. It maybe doesn't fully describe the intention or the needs that are underneath the comment. So anyway, I got really excited about that particular topic. And I reached out to Susie, and I'm so glad that she agreed to be a guest on Meta Mentoring. Susie is a Canadian author, public speaker, and songwriter, and she's currently living in the UK. So she has experience both in Canada and the UK, and navigating medical systems in both areas. She was diagnosed almost dying with type 1 diabetes at the age of 9. And she's been collecting illnesses ever since. She has a regular column called Expert Patient Here to Help. And that column can be found in 6 Manitoba newspapers. Susie is passionate about helping people go from being a patient or just a number to being a person at the doctor's office. She also aims to help people reframe their language when it comes to being supportive to those who are hurting. Negative positivity is real. You can find multiple articles Susie has written about living with illness in The Mighty, and I subscribe to The Mighty, by the way. It's an online health community supporting people facing health challenges and disabilities. She has just finished a manuscript called Help the Doctor Help You, 25 Tips for Getting the Best at Your Appointments. And she's working on a memoir about her chronic illness life. So I'm really excited to have Susie share. Again, I love her messaging, going beneath the comment that maybe is missing the mark and exploring what might be underneath that comment, and then finding ways to communicate that instead. I also really appreciate that she's out there having these conversations and trying to help people understand how negative positivity comments can be received, because I think these conversations can be really difficult to have for a person who is in pain themselves, experiencing grief, experiencing chronic illness. It can be really difficult to have those conversations. You might not feel like you have the capacity to say to this person, hey, you're adding to my pain. Again, it can also be a really challenging thing for someone to receive. If you say a comment and your intention was to show your care, and show that, I understand a piece of what you're saying, and it matters to me, you matter to me. And yet the thing that comes out of your mouth misses the mark or adds more pain. It's helpful to know that. And I think this format, listening to a conversation with Susie, I think that can be really helpful in understanding, like, oh, I see myself there. I think I've done that. And then thinking about what you might be able to do differently next time. So yeah, without further ado, here is my conversation with Susie Schwartz, and we are going to talk about negative positivity. Hi, Susie. Thank you so much for joining me on the Meta Mentoring podcast. I was really taken with what you had to share in the world, and I especially love the phrase, that you were collecting diseases, because it seemed like, well, first of all, your sense of humor came through, but also it was just sort of like a neat take on looking at that experience of having more than one medical diagnosis. And um, yeah, can you explain a little bit more about your journey and yeah, whatever other parts you think are helpful for us to understand your experience?
Sure. Well, thank you, Erin, for having me. It's an honor to be here. And yeah, I can share my story. So I'll at least share the highlights because it's a little bit too long for the time we have today to get into it all. But my chronic illness story started at age 9 when I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and I was very ill. So almost lost my life the night we ended up going to the hospital, was in the ICU for a few days. But here I am still many years later. And diabetes is a ongoing tricky beast, but I'm hanging in. And then in my early 20s, I developed a pituitary tumor, which is right on the front of the brain here. So I had to have that removed. And brain surgery is a treat, let's just say. Um, so yeah, there's that. Then this is when we start collecting things. I got my fibromyalgia in my 20s as well. And then in my 30s, I went to the ophthalmologist for a routine appointment. And he told me that I had stage 4 retinopathy, which means that I possibly was going blind, which did happen on separate occasions in each eye. And I needed eyeball surgery to restore my sight mostly. And I don't know if you want to hear about that, Erin, those surgeries
Yeah,
a little bit, but
yeah, tell a little bit, just a little bit.
okay. Well, it's warning, warning. It's I don't even know how to categorize it, but
Graphic?
my first the first one was my left eye, and basically you can't sleep because you're when you're in REM sleep, your eyes move. So they just locally freeze the eyeball, and so I'm in this dark room, and the surgeon basically puts a Hoover, a vacuum cleaner, into my eye. And the crazy thing was, is it didn't hurt, but I could see it from the inside. So back and forth, like cleaning a carpet, there was this Hoover in my eyeball, which freaked me out. And I said to the doctor after, like, was that supposed to happen? And he said, well, it can, but you should have said something. And I was like, I had a Hoover in my eyeball. I didn't want to risk moving my lips to tell you this was happening. So, anyways, fast forward, that restored most of my sight in that eye. And then fast forward, I had another bleed in my right eye, which blocked my sight, needed the surgery again. And this time I did not see the Hoover, but I felt everything. So that also was quite the experience. And I go in circles thinking, which would I prefer? And to this day, I can't decide, but I can just hope I never have to do it again, although it is a possibility. So, moving on from the temporary blindness and eyeball Hoover disease, I have been threatened with MS a few times, still a possibility, and had a mass in my liver that did miraculously disappear that should never have. So that's good news. But then I developed gastroparesis, which is autonomic neuropathy of the gastrointestinal system. And that means the nerves are basically not doing their job, pushing the food through out of your stomach and then through your system. So everything slowed right down and kind of stopped. So to save my life, they put a machine into me. It was a gastric pacer that they implanted into my belly wall. And then wires from that wormed up through my abdomen attached to the bottom of my stomach, with the theory that that would help stimulate, because it's giving electrical charges, movement. It ended up to be a disaster. I couldn't eat hardly anything for 2 years, caused awful pain, debilitating. So we removed that. And thankfully, my gastroparesis, it flares up and it kind of calms down, but it's always part of my picture. So I won't get graphic about the things I have to do to keep things moving, but let's just say it's not a natural process. So that's ongoing. And then within the last 8 years or so, I developed ME, also known as chronic fatigue syndrome, which is so much more than fatigue. And that causes my legs to not work some days, or sometimes my arms as well. Massive muscle fatigue, as well as the tired fatigue that you can get, and pain. And there's overlapping symptoms with fibromyalgia. And so it's hard to sort out what's what. But that has been massively debilitating to the point of me being bedridden for months, and has been doing absolutely everything for me. But thankfully, I did. It's still part of my picture, but I'm doing much better now. It flares up, but my flares are still not nearly as extreme. So I'm very thankful for that. And I've always had migraines, and I have food intolerances. So trying to navigate what to eat with all of these things going on is tricky as well. So anyway, that's the highlights. I won't get into the mundane.
Well, I actually really appreciate you sharing in a little bit more detail, about the Hoover experience, or when you were explaining about the nerve damage in your gastrointestinal tract, and how that didn't work out, because I think understanding some of the painful details, I think that's important. Like it's part of your story and part of, your experience. And I think also, like for me, it helps me get a little taste of what you've gone through. And even so, even hearing your experience, some of what you're sharing, you're making, you're smiling and you're making little jokes about it. But even still, I'm having gone through my experience with my disease. I know how terrifying some parts are, and how real and scary some of the pain, and just the unknown, and feeling isolated, and sorry, and there's my cough coming up. So I appreciate hearing some of the little details. And I think it also, it reminds me, even though I have like a little taste of what it feels like to have a chronic illness, a chronic disease, I don't like, I still struggle with, oh, how do I respond? Like, how do I respond to all of that? Because I understand a smidge of it, but I want to convey like so much more of what my heart is feeling, and I have no idea where to go with it. And so I understand that in having all these experiences and collecting these diseases, you've probably had a lot of people like me who've tried to respond, want to convey what I'm feeling in my heart, and can't find the words for it. And sometimes it comes out in comments that don't quite hit the mark. And when I was, thinking about what sort of things I wanted to share on my podcast, one of the things that made the list was toxic positivity. And in getting in touch with you, you sort of said, what if you reframed it to something else? Because toxic is not quite, or at least not necessarily what the other person is going for. Like they might have a really good intention. But maybe I'll let you explain that, and I'll mute
Sure.
myself and give myself a chance to cough.
Yeah.
But can you
Whatever.
explain why you prefer the term negative positivity instead of toxic positivity?
Sure. And I'll just back up for 1 second. I want to say that I do rely heavily on humor, and sometimes it gets pretty dark. I'm not going to lie. But there have been moments in my life where I wanted to die, and that I felt an utter loneliness that I feel like no one else is inside me. No one else gets it. And there have been some very dark times, pardon the retinopathy pun. But I feel like I have better days and worse days, but I get how hard it can be going through these things. And I don't always feel like laughing, but in general, I always want to be able to laugh. So there you go. It's a gamut of emotions. So to speak to the toxic positivity. I think people who love us, or even like us, or just know us a little bit, hear a little bit of our story, and they feel like they need to say something, and they want to be encouraging. And I think that the trickiness is it doesn't always come across that way to the receiver. But because I know that generally they mean well, I think when we throw around the term toxic positivity, it's a bit strong. And maybe it exists some of the time. Maybe it is sometimes outright toxic. But I think that negative positivity just is a better way of saying it's not helpful, can't even be harmful, but it's still well intended. And I like to give people the benefit of the doubt for that, because I think people are just trying to, uh, just when they say look on the bright side, they're just hoping that you can. And there may be other reasons that they say these things, but I think that's why toxic is just a bit too strong of a word for me. So,
Yeah. And that's sort of the part that I wanted to explore next. Once you suggested that other label of negative positivity, then I started thinking a little bit more about, yeah, what is the intention behind some of the comments? And one of the ideas that came to my mind, thinking back to some of the comments that I've received, sometimes it's a way of the person indirectly saying their boundary or their capacity. Like, I don't have space to talk about this right now. Think positive. You keep that part to yourself. I don't think I can go there. And I mean, that part feels hurtful sometimes, because sometimes, I'm with someone that I thought could handle it, or was open to handling it. Or I thought our relationship was strong enough that they'd be able to say, oh, I really can't show up in this way right now, like acknowledging a little bit more directly. But yeah, I was thinking about that idea of, why would people be saying these comments? Sometimes it is coming from a place of a really loving, thoughtful, caring intention, and it just misses the mark. And then other times I think it's an expression of, I can't handle this right now, or we're not going to go there. We're going to glide past whatever deep comment you just made. And both can be hurtful. They just both have, I suppose, different intentions. One, the person wants to show up, and the other one, they can't, or it feels too uncomfortable for them and they don't know how to get past it. So, throw out a blanket statement that sounds positive. Yeah, do you have
yeah,
anything
and
else you want to add?
yeah, well, I was just going to say, I think you're absolutely right. There are two things that might be going on. They really care and empathize, but just don't have the words for it. But you're right. I think some people can't handle it, and I think that speaks more to um, that perhaps they aren't able to handle their own emotions, and at least the harder ones, the less positive ones, and so they're afraid to cry in their own hard times, or they're afraid to cry in front of someone else. Never mind trying to deal with your tears or your hardness, and hardness as in difficult times. And yeah, I think it's about either insecurity or a self-protection, because whoa, I can't get emotional in front of someone else. I don't know how to do that. And you're right. It feels hurtful again as the receiver, because it's like saying you're not willing to go through this with me. But I think it's a self-preservation, and again, isn't necessarily um, it's not mean spirited. It's not helpful, but they just they just can't, like you said.
Yeah. It doesn't have anything to do with us. I think that's the
That's right.
part that I recognize. Like, sometimes receiving those comments, I'm recognizing, sometimes I don't know. I don't know what the intention was. And other times, they'll give a tell, they'll give a clue. And I'm like, you can't go there. Okay. And then, and then it's sort of like back into me and my experience of like trying to hold both places, um, or have understanding for where they might be at hmm, without judging them for it.
And that takes energy to
Yeah,
to realize it's about them and not you, and then not feel the hurt that the words inflict. Yeah, that takes energy that we don't always have as a sick person. So
yeah. I have many stories of like I do NVC, and within NVC we have this thing called the jackal, and the jackal is an expression of judgment thoughts or things that could be disconnecting. And I have so many of receiving a comment from someone, and in the moment I don't have the capacity to like empathize with them. I'm in too much
mm,
pain myself.
yeah, yeah.
And then afterwards circling back and then trying to find self-compassion for myself, like, oh, I didn't react the way I wanted to. It was because I was feeling this. Such a human response, like trying to find that gentleness for myself. And then once I've given myself enough of that, then they probably were in a similar place.
Mm.
They were experiencing, you know, some big feelings themselves, didn't know what to do. But yeah, it takes a lot of time to go through that process. I'm always glad when I do because I feel more at peace, but it does take energy and time. And I've often thought about that, like part of my experience, and it sounds like yours too, with having a new disease is I have to go slower in general, like physically. I can't do what I used to do. I can't do what people around me are doing. Um, but some of the going slower is the mental stuff too of,
Absolutely.
oh, how to move through this, how to process things. The pain shows up unexpectedly, the emotional pain or the physical pain. Um, so yeah, it's it's a process that takes a
Absolutely.
lot
Yeah.
of energy, just like you said.
Mm.
Um, I'm really curious. I know that you have written and shared a lot about common negative positivity comments that you've received or heard. Are there any that you could highlight and speak to in more detail?
So yeah, there's a few that happen commonly, I think, for people in the chronic illness world. And then there's some that I think happen a little bit maybe more specifically just because of context, um, as in perhaps more religious, like God is in control or those types of things. And then there's a couple that really I struggle with because they're specific to diabetes. So I'll just give you a couple of those of each category. But I think a lot of people say to anybody going through a hard time, whether it be chronic illness or depression or perhaps maybe not depression, but if a specific crisis or hard thing has happened, we hear that everything happens for a reason. And that's a hard one because whether there's truth in that statement or not, when a person is struggling, they don't have it in them to try to find a reason. And when tragedy strikes, how do we possibly find a reason? Like I just can't. So that just seems like, yeah, it's a hard one to hear. And I've had it could always be worse, right? Thrown my way. And of course, worse things have happened, but I don't know, like maybe you wouldn't find going blind hard, but I certainly did. And yes, there's tragedies in the world like earthquakes killing, tens of thousands of people. Absolutely terrible things happen to other people. But wow, this is still hard for me. And so I think then there's the stay positive or look on the bright side sort of statements that kind of feel like commands. They feel a bit like something to add to your to-do list. And like we're not quite getting it right, feeling or feelings. And I think I'll mention in a little bit why that I think that's important. But yeah, they're they're to be honest a little bit bossy. Do this. Look on the bright side. look for the lesson in it, stay positive. And and well, it's too hard in the moment. So some reframes I have for those. Everything happens for a reason. Well, maybe you could say something like, I don't understand why this is happening to you. Like, I don't understand why it's so hard.
Mhm.
Or it could be worse, right? Maybe it's like, I really wish this wasn't so hard for you. Recognizing what is happening and not what could be happening. And the stay positives and the look on the bright side. Um, I mean, perhaps maybe just something like, I'm wishing the best for you. I hope that things will get better. You be the positive person in a gentle, affirming way. Don't expect that person to feel that way. And so that would be my reframe for those. Some of the things that I hear in my diabetes world, which also can apply to people perhaps with cancer or other diseases, or when somebody says, you tell them you have type 1 diabetes, for example, and then they go, oh, I know someone who has type 1 diabetes. Yeah, they went blind and then they died shortly after. Now, I don't think that it's necessarily meant even to be a positive statement. I think they're just trying to be relatable and say the first thing that comes in their mind. But this is when I think we need to think about our words, because the fear that that induces in a person who knows the truth anyway. I know I could go blind. I know I could die from this disease, but to hear it affirmed that someone else did and that they knew them just puts it right up close to us, and yeah, instills some fear. Um, the other thing that really irks me is when people say, when somebody has passed away at an earlier age than elderly and had diabetes, um, they'll say, oh, yeah, that person, they died from the diabetes. They didn't take good care of themselves, or they didn't take good care of their diabetes. And again, I think it's that sense of trying to be relatable, perhaps, but to me, that just speaks of judgment that's totally unnecessary and misplaced, because diabetes is a 24/7 disease. And we are trying hard, and it's exhausting. And then to hear that someone is going to possibly judge you for what you did or didn't do when they have no idea, they haven't walked your shoes, is a harmful statement. So I just think we need to be careful about what we say in reference to disease. So yeah, that's kind of some of those things. Just if you can stop yourself from saying them all together. I don't even know if I have a reframe, except that if you find yourself saying, "Oh, I know someone who has diabetes," and realize this is going to go negative, perhaps just say something like, "Yeah, and I watched them struggle with it for years." Because that is affirming to the struggle and how hard the disease is, and it puts the onus on the disease and not the person. Uh, which is, yeah, I think it's all part of the bigger picture of negative positivity. So
Yeah, I could really relate to a lot of the negative positivity phrases that you shared. Um, and maybe for my own healing, I would like to dip into some of them a little bit more.
hmm,
I've had people ask me about my disease, and as soon as they hear that it's an autoimmune disease, um, that one has been so tricky because some people have reacted with, oh, so there was something wrong with you before, and that's why you have this now.
oh, wow.
And I know. And that one's really hard because part of me understands. I think they're trying to distance themselves from ever having to experience a similar kind of autoimmune disease. Like, I was very healthy before. This totally caught us off guard. Um, and so part of me recognizes that I think that they're looking to get some distance from my experience because it's, absolutely turned my life upside down.
Well,
Um,
and if it's something that you had going on within you in their minds already, then it feels safe to think they probably don't have that in them. Although
yeah.
if they know anything about autoimmune diseases, it's usually triggered by a virus or I mean, it's the body attacking itself instead of the problem. So I can't. I've never heard that one. That is shocking to me, and I'm so sorry that you've heard that one.
Yeah.
But you're right. I do think it's that trying to feel safe from the disease. I think it's more about them than you.
Yeah. And I think when you mentioned, comments about God,
Mm,
my ideas about God have really, I mean, I've always had, probably a different take on God than other people. I have like an equivalent minor in religious studies. So I kind of looked at it
mm,
from a different angle um, for a while, but I have also received lots of comments in relation to God.
mm,
And a lot of people, maybe I'm generalizing too much here. My perception is that often when the God comments are coming up, again, it's people trying to make themselves feel safe. Like God must be, it's doing it for a reason. It's sort of like a different framing of that comment. Surely this is what God wants.
mm.
And
Well,
yeah,
God wants what's best for us, right? In quotations.
right.
So yeah,
And so,
yeah.
like part of me can hear where that might be coming from. But
Mm,
then the other part of me is like, ouch, do you know how painful that is to receive it? Um,
mm,
so yeah, those comments that um again, I think it's sort of, some comments are meant well, good intention, trying to bring a sense of peace or something like trying to offer peace. Um, and I also wonder if sometimes there's this undercurrent of, and I'm protected because I'm doing these things, or I don't have what you have. Um, and also, when I think about the commands that, look for the lesson, or there must be something that you're meant to learn here. I mean, yeah, we're learning all the time in
mm.
whatever life circumstances we find ourselves in. We're learning all the time. But this idea that um, I struggle with that. I'm not sure how I want to land in that one yet, but because yes, I have learned some really amazing things that I wouldn't have learned otherwise, but I'm not quite sure that I would have chosen this either. Um,
Absolutely, and that's where I've landed is that um, I can be thankful for the lessons, but good God, don't ask me to learn them like this. People have actually asked me, "Would you do this again to be the person you are today?" No, I don't ever want to do that again. I am happy with the person I am today. But are you kidding me? Like art brain surgery and implants and and no, I don't want to do it again. I want to do it again for the first time. So I think it is that tricky, it's not even a balance, but it's that trying to be grateful for what we've learned and who we are and recognizing it's okay to not like how we learned it. Like that, I think that's okay to feel both of those things. We can feel we can feel joy and sadness, pain, and we can laugh at the same time. So it's not one or the other, and it's not all of that. Sorry, yeah, all one or the other. And so I hear you on that one. And yeah, my answer is a hard no. I don't want to do it again.
I think the other one that I've really been grappling with is the idea that things could be worse. Because on one
Mhm.
hand, like even me comparing my experience to your experience, I recognize, wow, your experience sounds worse. And yet pain is pain, like the
Mm,
emotional pain, the physical pain,
mhm.
like pain is pain. And when you're feeling it,
Hard.
it's hard. You're not so aware of a gradient. It's just, I'm feeling pain right now. I'm feeling scared right now. And so yeah, that's one that I'm still struggling with myself. Things I recognize, yeah, things could be worse. And people do have, even within my disease, people have a far worse um experience, like I'm kind of an anomaly right now.
Mm,
And also it's just right now. um,
mm.
and yeah, that one I don't quite know what to do with. Like things could be worse because part of me is thinking, yeah, I do deeply know that things could be worse. Um,
Yeah, and I think I just had two thoughts there. I'll come back to the other one. But even if I look at my own picture, so today, for example, I am about to have my big toenails removed. Now, that compared to brain surgery or going blind and having a Hoover in my eyeball or an implant in my belly with wires wormed up through there causing me agony is not a big deal. But guess what? That's what I'm dealing with today. And it's going to hurt. And thankfully, I'm not too vain about my toes because they look horrendous already now. So it's not going to get any worse by not having toenails there. But perhaps there might be an emotional element as well to like, oh, so much for being on the beach and taking those lovely photos of your toes in the sand. I mean, that's not going to happen again. So sure, things could be worse. They've been worse for me in my own story, but it's still on this day I have to go through it and it's hard. So I say, let's drop the comparisons because they're not helpful ever. And for someone else to say that just minimizes what we're going through. Oh, it could always be worse. Well, I guess I'm not allowed to feel this at all then because someone else has it worse. And that is so dismissive and not helpful. I just wanted to comment on you said you're an anomaly right now. And I noticed that you put that in there right now. And I feel you when you say that because sometimes if I say, oh, I've been really struggling, but I feel like I'm slowly getting better. Some people will say, oh, I'm so glad you're doing great. No, 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 that's not what I'm saying. But you can't really say that because they obviously don't want to hear it. But I feel like we have to caution people that no, we're not healed. We're not, it's not all good. We're still dealing, but we're thankful that it isn't worse. But still, like, see my pain. Please still see me and understand me. So when you said that, I was like, oh yeah, I would do the same thing. I would throw in that right now because you don't know what's coming, and
yeah,
you know that there's a chance that it could get worse. And I certainly hope it doesn't for you. But
yeah,
yeah, that's another one that's on my list actually. So
yeah. Um, are there any other phrases or reframes that you want to share?
um I mean there's the hashtag um be positive or positivity is a lot on gratitude posts online. You see that a lot. Be
Yeah,
grateful in all things, be thankful. And again, uh, that's a lot to ask. I can look at things that I'm thankful for any day of the week, any moment of the week, even while I'm in agony. But to ask me while I'm in agony to be thankful for the agony just doesn't make sense for humans. I don't think. I just don't think that that's helpful. So I just think that telling someone to be thankful in all things should be erased.
mhm,
If you want to say that you're thankful and hashtag that, great. I do that. But commanding someone, and I will just touch on, I think, why it's so important to me that we reframe these phrases. I have said things like this to people myself, and I wish that I didn't, and I'm learning too. I'm on this journey with everyone else. I give it a lot of thought, so perhaps that's why I've got some reframes already figured out, which I try to apply. But why this is so important is because I feel that we as humans naturally have emotions, and emotions are information as to what's going on within us. An emotion is different than attitude. And I think we need to be able to recognize our emotions, name them, embrace them, feel them, share them, at least with people who are safe or that can handle them. But I think it's okay for us to speak to the fact that we're struggling we don't need to air all our dirty laundry, but let's get comfortable with people struggling. I think we need to do that because we're feeling it anyways. And trust me, our bodies know, and our minds, if we don't allow them to think it, it will come out a different way. And it's natural. It's a natural coping mechanism for all that happens in life. And our tears are natural and they're a release. And talking about our troubles are natural. And that's a release. And so I think that we don't want to get stuck in our emotions, but we have to, I think, recognize them. And then we can let them pass through us, uh, when allowed. But yeah, let's just get comfortable with being human. That's why I'm passionate about this. Language matters, um, when it comes to emotion. I would just like to end on the note of people hearing that this is not to instill guilt. If you've said something to someone and you go, "Oh shoot, I've said that to people," you know what? We all have. I get it, and I'm sure it was kind-hearted. But let's going forward learn from each other and just realize that words matter. And what might be a flippant statement or cliche to you that's fairly meaningless can have power for the receiver. So going forward, let's just try to reframe, but not get stuck in guilt of what's happened in the past. If you feel like making an apology to someone, do that. But I don't even think that's necessary if we start hearing that reframed language and start again getting comfortable with each other's emotions. I think that's the key.
And I think that's why I felt so excited to have this conversation with you, because sometimes it can feel a little bit more safe to hear comment, like have this overhear the conversation first and then have your exposure there. And then the next time you're in one of those situations
Mm,
where you feel the pull to say, stay positive, maybe that, maybe you'll just sort of hold back for a second and think, oh, okay, I don't know what to do here,
mm,
but I know that I don't think I want to say that. And so I think that's why this conversation to me was such possibly an empowering one, because,
mm.
letting people have the information, but in a safer way, because sometimes it can feel too vulnerable. Like for me, I'm not sure I'm in a place yet where I want to have those conversations with people.
That's right. Yeah.
Even though I'm feeling it and recognizing it, I'm like, oh, that would take a lot of emotional work on my part. I'm not ready to have that conversation. So
Yeah.
overhearing our conversation,
Mm,
you can have some exposure to it and recognize potentially in yourself as you're living it in the moment, oh, wait a minute, I don't think I want to say that.
mm.
Um,
And if I may actually take back what I said about saying one last thing and say one last thing. You know what? When in doubt, if you don't know what to say that. Because if you say, I don't know what to say, that in itself is a supportive statement because it speaks to them recognizing this is an impossible situation that there are no words for. So when in doubt, say, I don't know what to say. And always a hug is great too.
Oh, and that's such a good point, that sometimes there aren't words. Like sometimes there
Mm,
there are just no words.
mm,
And conveying, like, I'm feeling it with you in whatever ways I'm feeling it with you, conveying that through a hug or
mm.
just like a meaningful like nod,
Yes.
just
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
that feels like connection,
Mm.
that's huge, right? Would you be willing to share what you're working on right now and how people who are interested can stay in touch with you and follow along in your journey?
Yeah. So well, when I'm not songwriting, which I will just say some of your listeners might actually be interested in one of my artist profiles. I have two. Susie Bird. I've got I just started releasing under that artist name. So SUSIEBIRD. But it's got a couple of songs. One is more about mental health, and one is about actual physical sickness. and it's called It's Lonely Here. And so I think that it's perhaps relatable for some of your audience. My other artist name is Sushwa, Suschwa. If you're interested, I have a lot of piano instrumentals there. But that's just a side note in case that might resonate. I'm constantly writing, so I have a forthcoming book called Help the Doctor Help You: 25 Tips for Getting the Best at Your Appointments. And that is because I am also, along with this topic, passionate about helping people gain good relationships with their doctors and their medical professionals, in order to get the best care. And there are ways of doing that, getting them to trust you, getting them to, pick up your calls or whatever. And I know that I'm in the UK. I grew up in Canada, so I'm most familiar with those two medical systems. But certainly relationally, we can all build strong relationships, usually with our medical professionals. So that book will be coming out hopefully in the near future. And I also have a forthcoming memoir that I'm working on about my chronic illness. So no dates on that yet, but in the process. And I have a support weekly email. It's just short, and it's called Combos with Carlos. One quote, one question. No, one care, one quote, one question. And Carlos is my little chihuahua, and basically I tell him all my thoughts. So that's the name of the newsletter. But if you want to sign up for that, it's in my link tree on my social bios or on my website. And so my website, I think, is in the notes, but lesshealthstress.com. And I'm most active on Instagram, and my handle is at medical miss, MISS _ stress, STRESS, medical mistress. So you can find me there, and all my information is at those places if you want to join on the ride.
Well, thank
And
you.
you'll get a toe update tomorrow. Everybody wants that.
I actually know someone who had that surgery, and
Right.
yeah, I appreciate you coming on today, knowing that you're going to have this toenail removal surgery right after this interview. So thank you for, I don't know, thank you for sharing your capacity
Well, thank you for sharing. Thank you for distracting me from my toenail surgery.
After recording this interview, Susie and I both agreed that the main thing we wanted to lift up and highlight is that we have all said negative positivity type comments. I think this conversation can be a really tricky one to have with people that we care about, which is why I thought it was a really helpful idea for Susie and I to have the conversation so that you can listen in. You can do some of the learning on your own in private, so that you can feel your vulnerable feelings, not in front of the people that you care about. And like, for those of you who are grieving and going through something right now, I'm actually hoping that you feel validated and heard in your experience of receiving some negative positivity comments. I know that when people are saying them, they are not coming from a place of wanting to add more hurt. And we have all had moments like, honestly, even just recording this conclusion, I have re-recorded it several times because, I'm caught up in my own words, and my own judgments come out so easily. So Susie and I both agreed we wanted to lift up that we recognize that we're all trying to learn and figure this out. And not everyone, no one is going to be perfect in that journey. We're all learning out here together. So I hope that this recording was helpful for you. I fully intend to ask Susie to be a guest again so that we can learn more about her upcoming book. I think that would be so helpful. Regardless of what age you're at some point in time, you will likely need healthcare, and knowing how to show up in ways that that show your humanity and show up in ways that honor the person that your medical professionals are. I think that could be a really interesting conversation. So I look forward to having another conversation with Susie soon. Please make sure that you check out her links and her social profiles if you want to learn more about her work and follow her work. All right, thanks so much for listening, and I look forward to connecting again with you soon. Bye.